Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you all for joining this online conversation with this magnificent panel put together by TEPSA and CIDOB. This online event is titled Southern Europe and the COVID-19 crisis, not left behind this time. And as you can imagine, we want to debate how Southern Europe cope with the COVID-19 crisis, whether we are going to see a more united Southern Europe in future negotiations in the EU, and whether the proposal of response we have in front of us, that is the Frank-German plan and the next generation EU instrument, is enough or at least a place to start. To answer these questions, I have the pleasure to have with me Filipa, who is senior researcher at the Hellenic Foundation for European and Foreign Policy, Carlos, researcher at the Instituto Portugués de Relações Internacionais, Christian, full professor at Sciences Po Paris, Eleonora Poli, researcher at the Instituto Affari Internazionali in Rome, and Ilke, who is analyst in the Elcano Royal Institute. So before giving the floor to the speakers, let me remind you that you can ask questions in the Zoom or the YouTube chat. So I think that's all from me now. So I'm giving the floor in the order I presented you the speakers. So Filipa, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Hector. I'm very happy to be here with you and to have this discussion on this very, very important issue, the post-COVID Europe, let's say. Okay, first I will make some comments concerning my country, Greece, and the way that the government tried to deal with this crisis, with the pandemic crisis. I should remind to everybody that Greece had 10 years of huge austerity cuts, and these cuts actually had very negative effects on the national public health system. So Greece tried to deal with the pandemic crisis, knowing that the hospital structures are in a very bad shape. And this is the reason why the government decided to adopt measures earlier than other countries, because they knew that we didn't have the capacity to deal with a huge overload in case this would be the situation to deal with. So before the 2010, the Greek National Public Health System was ranked, according to the World Health Organization, among the best in the world. 10 years later, the public health system is in a very bad shape, as I said before. And so in this context of deteriorate hospital structures, and also in a context where we have a dramatic shrinking of medical and sanitary staff, Greece had to deal with this unexpected crisis. So, okay, the result is, let's say, more or less good. We had the chance to have not a lot of cases, but I think that the real reasons of that are not so much related to the government measures than to other reasons, but maybe this is not, let's say, in the heart of our discussion. So I will put that for later on. If someone would like to give more information, I could do that. And another important aspect of this issue, let's say the post-austerity situation in Greece concerning the health system, is that during these 2 months, we have a new brain drain of doctors abroad. 18,000 doctors left the country during this last 2 months in order to find a job in the hospital structures of other European countries. And this, I think, is very telling. I mean, it's interesting to see also this aspect. The brain drain continues, and each crisis actually can accelerate this trend. So in my country, at the beginning of the crisis, there was a lot of discussion about the return of the state. We are in a new era now. State interventionism will be at the first concern of of the government and blah, 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 blah. And it's interesting to see that 2 months later on, this is, of course, not the case. There is no return of the state. In the opposite, the government continues its agenda, which is actually to try to develop a privately run health system in Greece. So the the pandemic crisis was not a positive factor in order to rethink how we should rebuild public structures as far as concerns important sectors, as is the public health. So the plan now is to try to develop more and more what we call public-private partnerships in the sector of the health system, which means that, and I think this is a disappointing point to mention, is that we didn't take also this occasion of this crisis to reformulate big issues, to try to see if we should rethink our strategy, for example, what should be the role of the state, why we have crises that they succeed. First, we had the economic crisis, now we have another sanitary crisis. Tomorrow we'll have another crisis, maybe related to the climate change issues, etc. So in a certain case, we continue, we persist to use old tactics, old strategies, and we don't try to renew our way of saying things. So this is the first point. The second point that I would like to put on the table has to do with the question of the role of the EU during these 2 months and how the Greek people or Greek society react on the different initiatives that the European Union took during this period. At the beginning of the crisis, we had exactly the same problems as the majority of the other countries in Europe. So we were missing of vital equipment, we were missing of protective equipment, we didn't have the capacity to make massive diagnostic tests, etc., etc. So all these problems, and of course, to that we should add the question of refugee camps, which was also another factor, very important factor that increased our concerns about how we are going to deal with refugees in case that we could have many cases within the camps. So in this specific issue, for example, the refugee camps, how to handle COVID within the camps, actually the European Union was absolutely not here. There was no initiative on this concerning this aspect. And in a certain way, the government tried to instrumentalize the situation in order to adopt some decisions in order to legitimize the idea that we should close the camps, for example, as if this could be the solution to the problem. So I think that this is something that we felt from the very beginning, that the European Union didn't want to take any kind of initiative concerning the COVID crisis and how to handle the refugee camps in Greece. And of course, the other aspect of the problem is that all the European initiatives that they were taken were not felt immediately because there was a lot of ambiguous information. For example, as far as concerns the wearing of the mask, or as far as concerns if we should or not proceed to massive diagnostic tests. So there was a lot of confusion, and in a certain way, the role of the European Centre for Disease Prevention and Control was very secondary, let's say. Okay, and this is also a point to mention, because of course, the World Health Organization has the main role, okay, concerning how to advise states and also societies. But I should say that I could expect from the European Centre for Disease Prevention and Control, and so also from the European Commission, a more dynamic, let's say, interventionist role in this context. So, and of course, in this framework, we saw also some very worrying situations. For example, as far as concerns the supply of equipment. Yes.
You have 1 minute more.
Okay. And diagnostic tests. We saw that some European countries have been accused of sizing masks from destined for other European countries. And instead of having Germany, for example, trying to adopt a more dynamic role during all this period, we saw China and Cuba with a very energetic public health diplomacy have a very active role within the European continent. And so in Greece, Cuba, the role of Cuba or the role of China, as far as concerns equipment and all the others, medical equipment and masks and all these things, caught public's attention much more than what the European Union tried to do. So this is also a point that I would like to point out. And I will finish by saying that the positive thing for Greece concerning European EU decisions, of course, has been the fact that we had the suspension of Stability and Growth Pact terms. This was very important. The huge primary fiscal surpluses have been abolished, and this was a very good news for Greece, of course. But at the same time, the country trembles at the idea that public debt could go far higher than 200%. And so now we know that we have behind us a very difficult situation to handle from an economic and but also social aspect. So I will stop here.
Thank you, Filipa. Carlos, the floor is yours.
Thank you for your invitation, Hector. I will also deal first with how Portugal is trying to cope with COVID-19. We had an early start in lockdown, and we benefited a lot from the experience of Greece, Italy, also France. We have a high rate of infections, but a low rate of fatality, and probably the early start of the lockdown avoided a crisis in the social security system, in the national health services, so far at least. We have been under lockdown for about 2 months since the beginning of March, and we are slowly going back to normalcy. It's still not yet the case in the Lisbon region, the most important region in the country, because there is still a very high rate of infection in many of the districts around the Portuguese capital. The long lockdown, of course, will have a very strong impact in the economy. Tourism, which has been at a complete stop since the beginning of the crisis, is around 14% of Portuguese GDP. So the impact on tourism is very, very strong. Also on the manufacturing sector, the authorities are accepting the number of a fall of 8% of annual GDP. It will probably be rather higher than that. Also, of course, Portugal will have a lot of difficulty in in offsetting the costs of the COVID-19 crisis, because of very high level of the public debt. It's around 120%. And as in Greece, everybody is extremely worried that it might jump to 150% at the end of this year. So all the progress that had been made with a lot of difficulty in responding to the euro crisis, to the latest crisis, is at stake. The new crisis is following on the footsteps of the last crisis when it was not yet dealt with. Austerity was still very strong in the public policies in Portugal, and the recovery, the social recovery, the recovery of the payrolls for the professionals was still a process in the making. So the impact, the economic and social impact of the crisis is rather strong. In Portugal, there has been so far a united front in supporting the minority socialist government policies in dealing with the crisis. Both the left-wing parties and the center-right parties have been extremely cautious and moderate in any criticism. So the government has had all the political conditions needed to deal with the crisis. So far, this has been a relatively stable political and also relatively stable social situation. How is Southern Europe dealing with the COVID crisis? Is it going to be more united? Your question is excellent, especially since, if my memory doesn't fail me, we were not united at all in the euro crisis. I remember when there was an intervention in Greece, the Portuguese Prime Minister spent his day telling everybody that Portugal is not Greece. And next, when we went down, we were every day, the Spanish Prime Minister saying, Spain is not Portugal, and so on and so forth. So cohesion in Southern Europe was something that did not exist at all. On the contrary, on this crisis, after the difficult first weeks, there has been a very strong concerted effort in responding to the crisis. This was mainly around the France-Italy axis, which I think was critical in defining the European Union response to this crisis. Portugal was actively engaged in trying to bring together as large a group of small and medium peripheral countries to support the initiatives of President Macron, who we see as the key to the drafting, to the outline, to the strategy, which is giving form to this European Commission plan. Of course, the main issue, in my opinion, was that there was a real risk of an Italexit. The polls in Italy showing that more than 40% of Italians were ready to vote leave if a referendum on the European Union was arranged in Italy, I think was a critical factor in the decision of both France and Germany to bring together this initiative for the recovery of Europe. it's true that so far we have survived without the United Kingdom, but I doubt that we would survive without Italy. There is only a limited flexibility on these issues. So the Italian question was, I think, critical. It was the French president who answered the call from the Italians. The summit between Macron and Conte, I think, was also very important politically in drafting.
Carlos,
this.
1 minute.
1 minute. Yeah. I'm finishing. This plan. Is the plan enough? The plan is never enough, but it sends the right message. Macron and Merkel are telling us that they will do whatever it takes to respond to the crisis, as Draghi did back in 2012. And that is going to be enough to respond to this crisis. And the Portuguese authorities have been extremely supportive of this Franco-German initiative, and also of the European Commission plan. The foreign minister has just said in an interview that it is an historical initiative, and that he is confident that it will be approved by the July by the European Council. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Carlos. Christian, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Hector, and thank you to our colleagues for those very interesting statements. Well, France, as you know, is a country which has been, like Italy, like Spain, highly affected by the virus. We have around 28,000 people dead. When you're doing a sociology of the dead people, you see that most of them are more than 55 years old. So especially the elderly people were affected. So it has opened a debate in France about care houses and how we treat old people in the society. Because of this difficult situation with two big clusters, one Paris and the suburbs, and the second one Eastern France, so the region of Alsace. Well, a lockdown was decided on the 12th of March, and this lockdown was a total lockdown until the 2nd of June. So we are just now going out of the lockdown, but it's a regime of semi-freedom to a certain extent, and Paris is still with a lot of restrictions compared to the rest of the country. The hospitals, they responded relatively efficiently, and they had very good cooperation. The debate was more about the salaries of those who were working in these hospitals, because we discover that the salary of the nurses in particular were below the OECD average, and the same for the public doctors. So it has opened a big debate on these people who were suddenly the heroes of the society. And the second debate was the absence of mask at the beginning of the pandemic. So those elements was elements of controversies, which probably explain why Macron, who, according to my point of view, managed relatively well the things, did not increase his popularity. And this is a difference with other countries. If you take Conte, for instance, Conte in Italy, well, he benefited from the crisis to increase his popularity. Quite rapidly, I think the government and the president saw the risk of the economic consequences for Europe. And I do agree with Carlos. Italy was absolutely crucial in the analysis because Italy is is a major economy of Europe. This is explaining the first letter on the 25th of March proposed by Macron to other heads of state and government. It was signed by 9 of them at the end, proposing Corona bonds. Of course, Paris didn't know how Germany will react to that, and this is explaining why most of the diplomacy done about the European recovery plan was oriented towards Berlin, because it was absolutely not obvious that Mrs. Merkel made the choice she made at the end. If you look at the debate, in particular inside the CDU-CSU party, but I think that the German industry played a big role because the German industry didn't want to have a major crisis of the Eurozone and of the EU. But for Macron, this element of convincing Mrs. Merkel was absolutely important and uncertain for a couple of weeks. Again, it was absolutely not obvious that Mrs. Merkel reacted as she did. Solidarity with the South, yes, definitely, because also for Macron, who still has some expectation about a more general reform of Europe. Well, he saw that in Southern Europe, in general, he can find support for the moment, and this is also something which was taking into account in the effort to speak with Southern Europe and also on behalf of Southern Europe to Northern Europe and to the Germans. The Franco-German initiative, is there. Of course, in a country like France, the consequences of the crisis will be high, and we were talking about possible effect on the Portuguese debt. Well, the same in France. Before the crisis, the public debt was 98% of the GDP, and the calculation now is that it could jump to 120. If you take public deficit, Macron and the government did huge efforts to reduce below 3%, but now it's more than 9%. So it means that the government is spending money, and this is a bit a concern, because France is a country where spending money is something very popular, something which is to a certain extent expected by the population, but you have to control it. And as we're going to have elections in 2022, presidential election, I'm not sure that Macron will be really able to control the public deficit and the public debt. And for me, it's a bit a concern. I would like to finish just saying that I don't think France, as we read sometimes in the press, is supporting what we call a Hamiltonian moment, because I don't think Macron is convinced that the future of Europe will be a federal Europe. He, well, of course, is very much in favor of reforms, but is also very pragmatic in terms of model. He knows perfectly well that well, having a federal state is not the point at the agenda, and that you have too many oppositions to that, including in France itself. If you take the far right and the far left, but there is this idea in France that well, if you want to move forward, and to a certain extent, if you want to defend the national interest of France, you have to go through Europe. So it's a sort of instrumentalization of Europe to defend the national interest, and this is probably something which is a long trend in the French European policy. So Macron's is just following up what the other presidents in the past well thought about the importance of Europe. I think now all the questions will be about the conditions of the implementation of the funds, and on this topic, of course, we can expect some resistance coming from Northern Europe, supported by Central Europe. So I could see a huge discussion in Brussels about the conditionality now of the aid. I stop here. Thank you.
Thank you, Christian. We'll talk about the conditionality in the second round probably. Eleonora, all yours.
Yes, thank you, Hector, and thank you to everyone. Well, as you know, Italy was, I think, the first European country to be hit by the pandemic. And let's put it this way, the pandemic hit Italy while Italy was already in a long economic and political crisis. Italy did not recover from the previous crisis. Italy tried to implement austerity policies. Many were implemented, but the economy was not going well. At the same time, we were facing migration from the Mediterranean, and we were basically in the middle of a sort of political crisis, in the sense that many anti-European parties, such as Lega or Brother of Italy, were gaining ground. But the COVID crisis represents a sort of 0 point for Italy, in the sense that we touched the ground, both economically and politically. Economically, we are going to face, and we are facing, a deep recession. The debt is going to be skyrocketing. Unemployment will grow again. The GDP, of course, is set not to grow, at least for this year. And the social consequences of this sanitarian crisis will hit hard the country. At the same time, however, politically, it was a sort of good moment for the government, in the sense that it took somehow the stage from all those populist sovereignist parties that were campaigning in Italy very strongly. If you consider that the Italian government acquired around 60% of the support during the COVID crisis, a government that was formed in August 2019, basically after Salvini tried to take the power. So we had a sort of unnatural alliance between the traditional left-wing party, Democratic Party, and the Five Star Movement. And Prime Minister Conte remained Prime Minister with his new government. So, you know, the support that this government had was provided by the Italian citizens was very low, especially because many were thinking that it was time in September to go to new elections. And this was evident also in regional elections, if you consider that in regional elections, the majority, well, the citizens expressed their support for right-wing parties, so for Lega and Brothers of Italy and Berlusconi's party. So in the majority of Italian regions now, you have this kind of coalition governing. But however, the COVID crisis resulted in more support for the Italian government. Prime Minister Conte unexpectedly came out as a leader, basically, and was able to lead Italy, at least for the moment, out of this crisis. We are now in phase 3. Things seems to go well. Regions are open, the country is open, and life is going back to a sort of normality. Let's see what is going to happen. I cannot be as much as positive as on the European side. However, Italy was already one of the most Eurosceptic country, and the COVID crisis and the first reaction that we got from member states and the EU itself kind of raised this anti-Europeanism. You had somehow traditional pro-European parties or groups that found themselves embarrassed because they didn't know what to say about the first reaction from European member countries and the EU itself. And on the other hand, you have anti-European that basically, for them, it was a sort of dream because they could again campaign against the EU, and they had actually arguments to do that. But this again was just the first reaction because, of course, European policies then change quite quickly, as we see, and also the attitude of many member states. I'm just talking about, the first, closure of borders by Austria, or the first decision by French and German government not to sell masks. But however, what sticks in the majority of the Italians now is just this first reaction. It's very difficult for them to trust again the EU and the member states, especially because as in Greece, other countries such as China or Cuba or even Russia were more vocal in basically making Italians aware that we're helping Italy in a time of need. We received some doctors from Cuba, we had some aid from China, Russia sent some doctors, and although, according to polls, Italians are well aware that maybe not just for Cuba, but China and Russia have some political plan behind this. They are well aware, still they believe that those countries were the one helping Italy more than the European Union. It doesn't matter if Germany took COVID patient from Italy to Germany. It doesn't matter if, again, we receive aid from other European countries, from Poland, for instance. The majority of Italians are still believing that, the aid that came from European Union and European member countries were quite low. 75% of the Italians think that the COVID in March, this perception might have changed now, but in March believe that the COVID crisis represents the end of the European Union. Of course, I think that the attitude might change. In Italy now, politically, the situation is quite optimistic. We have this recovery fund, this recovery plan. There is the chance, to get some help from the European Union. The European institutions are providing loans to the Italian institutions and economy. And there is this idea that actually we can make it, especially because the government is pushing a lot on the need to provide, to build a sort of recovery plan for Italy itself, so invest in digital economy, sustainability, innovation, culture, etc., etc. So there is a sort of positive attitude out of this crisis, and we are in a sort of golden moment. So the government, on the one hand, is trying to profiting of what is coming from the European Union in order to gain ground again politically, not to lose ground politically, because it is afraid that after the crisis, basically the support it got from the Italians might disappear. On the other hand, however, I think it's going to be difficult to convince the Italians that the European Union is there, especially after years of perceived absence of the European Union. I'm talking about, for instance, the migration crisis. Migrants are still coming, migrants are still there, and most importantly, migrants will be used by anti-European parties to campaign against the European Union. The attitude of Italians will change as soon as words will be converted into action. So as soon as basically their life will be touched by, European aid or European, institutions. And I believe this perception, of course, might change, but it will take a while. In the meanwhile, I believe the most important thing for Italy is to be politically resilient. So the government might be able to stay there. The positive news is that Salvini, Lega leader, is losing ground. So it passed from 32% in September 2019 to a 23-24% now, but it's still the first party in Italy. And on the other hand, who is growing is Brother of Italy, which is a radical right-wing party, which passed from 7% in September 2019 to around 14-15% now. And it's not a good news, actually, for those who support the European Union. The traditional party, Democratic Party, PD, and is not gaining support, actually is losing support, and the Five-Star Movement is stable. Like, he lost a lot of support, but now it's stable. However, the Italians, even though they don't trust a single party, they are trusting the government and the prime minister, because basically he took he took basically the stage as the strong, charismatic leader that basically Italians were looking for, or they wanted to have in Salvini or other right-wing leaders. So he might be able to, and he has been able so far to deliver. So there's great hope in the European recovery plan, and there is a great hope in this new sort of Southern Alliance, I think, which might help Italy to overcome this crisis and also build a better economy. Thank you.
Thank you, Ele. And last but not least, Ilke.
Thank you very much, Hector. I really have a bad connection today, so I hope this will work with video. Otherwise, please tell me. Thank you very much to Hector and CIDOB also for organizing this, and TEPSA for hosting us. I will try to answer your questions in 7 minutes. Let's see if that works. I think for understanding the case of Spain, we need to know a bit of the history of the country and the context for these years, because last year it was a very super electoral year. Local, regional, national, and European elections, they were all held in just one year, and it took a while to establish a government, and it was the first coalition government in the history of democracy. So the country has entered to this pandemic with a very polarized environment. The opposition has been giving the government a very hard time. Actually, like the colleague from France has said, Pedro Sanchez is also one of the few, a handful of leaders that really had a tough job and who didn't actually improve his approval ratings in the meantime either. The initial reaction of Spain was basically Europeanizing this public debate. I think this was a very clever move by the government, because in the first stages of the pandemic, it was portrayed as an issue of solidarity, but once the time has passed, it was mostly converted into a "we are in this ship together" discourse. So it was basically either we float together or we sink together. So the big picture has changed from solidarity towards kind of unity and Europeanization of the public debate. Clearly, for us, Spain also has played an important role. I was actually even surprised when Carlos said it was the French-Italian axis, because we thought that the coordination and cooperation between Italy and Spain also brought something positive to the European scene. We have witnessed, for example, a Spanish non-paper that was asking for even a more ambitious recovery fund. We are not there yet, clearly, but at least I think it helped to raise the bar in the European scene. You have also seen a country that was asking for at least some part of the European Commission's agenda to be still introduced in the recovery plan. So we have also seen mentions to ecological transformation, digital transition, and all these reforms kind of included. In addition to strategic autonomy, I should also underline that. No, how comes Spain is not going to support its high representative, its high representative Borrell in that sense, introduced already also in the agenda. In addition to that, I think one of the core points that Spain or the Spanish government has been underlining throughout the pandemic was the support for more Europe and support for more multilateralism. I think it was also important. This could connect to your previous, to your next question, if this might have a long-term effect, this pandemic. Maybe we can see, this is definitely too early to talk about, but maybe we can see kind of a conversion into a more active Spanish role in the European scene, because Spain has always been pro-European. It was almost like a naive pro-European country, and citizens were in favor of Europe. But in these times of pandemic, we have also seen a clear conversion, a clear Europeanization of the public space, and inclusion of the citizens also into the debate. Again, as I said, it is still yet to see. The first reactions of the government was quite positive to the Commission's proposal. It was not just the government, but also socialists and Democrats in the European Parliament very much supporting the plan. As you already know, PSOE, the Spanish Socialist Party, is leading the Socialists and Democrats in the European Parliament. But I think we should underline the role of the European Council here. I think it is very important. For me, the center of gravity has been shifting towards the European Council. It has been like that also in the previous crisis. I think this crisis mode makes European Council a more important institution. But this very much connects the internal politics of every country to the dynamics of European Council. So if we think about your question, if this can hold South-North divide, well, I'm not necessarily so hopeful. I'm sure there will be very intense negotiations about the plan. The last question was about, did this unite Southern Europe? I think it kind of united Italy and Spain. And I see this as a very positive development. I think it increased the coordination between these two very big and important countries of the Southern Europe and also the European Union. It is important to underline that after Brexit, Spain is becoming the fourth, the most populated country in the European Union, and it has a core role to play. And I think it is a very positive development that there's a cooperation between Spain and Italy. We will see if this will last, clearly, and it will clearly also depend on the government stability, both in the case of Italy and also in the case of Spain. Clearly, there was also cooperation with France. We have seen this also prior to the pandemic, because we have seen a Southern European bloc, including France, for multi-annual financial framework negotiations as well. So the coordination and cooperation with France goes back to the debate on common agricultural policy and cohesion funds. And I also see this as a happy development. But clearly, the intensity of the pandemic was quite different on the one side for Italy, Spain, and France, and on the other side for Portugal and Greece. So I think the intensity of the crisis also created the reactions, or led the reactions from these countries. Just one final remark before I'm concluding, because I should also have like 1 or 2 minutes left, is that I think that the next step is also very important. Now, we have somehow managed to get here. In the beginning, we were criticizing the European Union for the lack of solidarity. I think the European Union gave a very positive test afterwards. Even in the beginning, the reaction was not necessarily positive, and moved very giant steps in very short term. So, but now, since the proposal of the Commission, if it is approved at the end of the day, I'm going to assume that it is somehow moving forward, the ball will be back in the member states' corner, and every country is supposed to come up with plans and proposals, concrete projects that can efficiently use the already mentioned fund, because it's not the countries that will get the funding, but the concrete project proposals and the ideas for reform and construction in the future. So I hope that the country, Spain, will move go ahead of this polarized environment, because the opposition is giving a very hard time to the government right now, and create some kind of united front for coming up with these proposals and creating a plan for the short-term future of the, even short to medium-term future of the country, not just recovering from the COVID-19 crises, including the economic dimension, but also going for reforms in ecological transformation, digital transition, and various other areas that the country would clearly benefit and come out stronger. But clearly, political environments will play a very important role in Spain. I think I will stop there and elaborate further in the question.
Thank you, Ilke. Thank you very much to you all. We are running a little bit out of time, but have a bunch of questions here. I think I'll ask one and make a quick round of answers and see how much time we've got left. So Christian spoke briefly about conditionality, and here's the question. We all know that Northern European countries won't accept any recovery plan if it doesn't come with conditionality attached. So the question would be, which conditionality could we accept? I mean, obviously, it cannot be cuts in public services, especially not on health, obviously. So, well, can we imagine a different conditionality where we can agree on? And if you are okay with it, we'll follow the same order. So, Filipa. Your mic, Filipa.
Sorry, yes. How much time do I have?
Try to make it as short as possible. So 2 minutes, let's say.
Wow. Okay.
5 minute tops.
Thanks. Okay. I think that from the point of Greece, the question has no answer. I mean, we know that for Greece, conditionality is a bad word in any case. And so, for example, even this government, which is a right-wing government, said that they will not decide to use the European stability mechanism in any case, because the European Commission said, if you have financial needs, you can also use VSM. And the Greek government said, VSM is remind us here this decade of austerity, which we would like to forget. And this, I mean, is an interesting point, because this means that Greeks now they have a very bad relationship with conditionality and with all the packaging, structural reforms, and cuts, spending cuts. So in any case, conditionality will be these kind of things. I mean, we know that we have a new era with structural reforms to put forward, and national plans for. So in my opinion, we don't have many kind of conditionality. And I would like to link that with some other remarks that are directly related to your question, Hector. For example, I think that the problem now that we're talking about this divide between North and South. but actually it's a misleading discussion. In my opinion, there is no real divide. For example, the role of France is a pivotal role. If I may, Professor Letienne, I would like to put the role of France in this specific context. We have countries, for example, Netherlands or Denmark, that these countries have more wide than Spain or Italy. And this is something that we should take into account when we're discussing about the equilibrium of power within the European Union. We know that Netherlands and Denmark, for example, they are using fiscal dumping. They had a lot of benefits. They received a lot of benefits from the single market, and at the same time, they refuse to discuss about any kind of plan that could lead to realization of debt. So we have countries I call free riders, and these countries, they are not, normally speaking, among the more powerful countries. I mean, Spain or Italy are more important than Netherlands and Denmark, normally speaking. But actually, we have now a new balance of power. So the pivotal country here is France. France, I think, that doesn't belong to the South. We would like to make a divide and decide that France is in the South, but this is not the case. And the diplomacy of France, the strategy of France, the official tactics of France explain very well that this country doesn't belong in the South. So in order to have real solutions with solidarity, with this nice term, we need France, but we would like to have, we need a different kind of French diplomacy within the European Union. And I think that this is not possible in this specific context. So the problem is that concerning this new emergency fund, we know from the beginning that the core Europe will decide about who will get the money, how much money, what kind of reforms will be imposed, etc. And Greece knows that from the beginning. Greeks know now that this is the deal, this is the agenda. And
sorry, I have to.
Okay, I will stop here.
So Carlos, I'll give you the floor, but just 1 second because we have a question from the audience. So if you want to pick on it as well while you answer my question, they are asking whether the Commission and the French-German proposal will not help the EU regain popular support, taking into account that it will not take very long to agree upon, and according to the people who is asking the question, is what Southern Europe needs to stabilize their economies. Carlos, please.
Thank you. I agree with Philippa that France is not a typical Southern European country, but Southern Europe only exists in European politics when France speaks on its behalf. Otherwise, it's divided, fragmented, and very much Southern European. So the key to this crisis is the fact that for the first time since the end of the Cold War, France was ready to speak on the behalf of Southern Europe, and rightly so. I think that we should welcome conditionality, and that we should be ourselves on the forefront of defining this conditionality. The main issues are strategic, and they are well defined in the Franco-German paper on the Initiative on Europe. This is a program for translating the concept of European sovereignty in concrete policies on the digital dimension, on the climate issues, and especially on the reindustrialization of Europe, and on the shortening of value chains, on the re-Europeization of value chains. This is very important for Southern Europe, and to upgrade, in a sense, the economies of Southern Europe. So we should welcome conditionality. We should have these grants and investments assigned to projects which are innovative, digital, energy transition, climate change, the recovery of competitivity, industrial competitivity. We need it. We need it very much so, and we should be the first ones to impose conditionality on these grants. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Carlos. Christian?
Yes, can I just start saying a word about the general role of France? I do agree that it's a pivotal role between the North and the South, but it does not mean that it's a leadership role at the end. I suspect the leadership for the moment is more in Berlin. Could you imagine if Mrs. Merkel said no to the recovery plan? Nothing would have been possible, or it would have been much more difficult for Macron and for the rest of the EU. So, and Macron probably knows that, right? He has to make sure that Berlin agrees with the strategy of the recovery plan, because in fact. The leadership is in Germany, which does not mean hegemony necessarily, because an hegemonic Germany would have said no to the recovery plan. But a leader Germany, definitely, this is my view. I think that we have to take into consideration in the South, and I'm including France, that we are, we will all be suspected of not wanting conditionality. So this is why I agree with Carlos, we have to propose it. We have to propose it. And what does it mean concretely? I don't think it would be wise politically to speak too much about, the Pact of Stability, etc., because the counter effect of that would be immediately to give legitimacy to Mr. Salvini in Italy, to Madame Le Pen in France, etc., etc. But we have to make sure that in the plans which will be asked to each country, we make the things seriously. And we don't spend the money, in a totally unuseful manner. It's very important that it is connected to the Green Deal, that it is connected to digital economy, that there is a central control of this spending of the money. Because if not, then we will just give legitimacy to those, including in Germany, who are against. I don't know if you're reading the Bild Zeitung, which is the most popular a newspaper in Germany, or even the economic pages of the Frankfurt Allgemeine Zeitung. It's clear that Merkel's choice has been accepted comme ci comme ça, right? So we have to take this political constraint into consideration, definitely.
Thank you, Christian. Ele?
Yes, I agree with Christian. I think we need conditionality. It needs to be a positive conditionality, in the sense that I'm kind of stealing this from a Dutch colleague. We need to build solid economy, basically, in the South. So, positive conditionality will be to make investment in things where we can be competitive. So, digitalization, innovation, education, culture, things that we already have, but basically we can improve. As far as the South team is concerned, I think, there's a change of rhetoric. Before this crisis, no one wanted to be in the loser team, being part of the South of Europe meant you are part of the inefficient, corrupted countries. And no one wanted to be, labeled as this. But now, I think we realized that basically, first of all, our economies cover a great part of the Eurozone economies, first of all. Secondly, we realized that we cannot leave, other countries taking the decision instead of us. And third, after, all the austerity years and austerity policy and the effect that the austerity measure had on Greece, but also other countries, maybe we realize at this time, we need to act differently. And again, I agree that the role of France there was central. I think France always is not completely a Southern European country, doesn't want to be a Southern European country, but the role of France there was strategic in order to give us voice and also credibility, because of course there cannot be European Union without France. And if France stick with Spain, Italy, and the rest of us, we might have a bigger role. Also, I also think that Spain was central in leading, this negotiation.
Yeah, thank you, Eleonora. Ilke, we cannot hear you, but maybe we can hear you.
Yes, I will keep the camera off because otherwise I cannot hear you well. But I heard Eleonora loud and clear, so I'm very happy. I will take it from there. For me, I think it is clear, and it has always been clear, that there is nothing like free lunch in the case of the European Union. I know conditionality is a haunted word, but I think when we think about, for example, the common agricultural policy, these funds were given for example, modernizing the agricultural sector. When we think about cohesion funds, it was for creating connections for disadvantaged areas to the centers. So the logic of the European Union in any fund is asking for something in return. If you call it conditionality, it sounds bad. But if you call it reforms in the digital area, or for example, bringing internet to your disadvantaged schools in poorer regions, etc., etc. If you think it that way, I think it can become more positive in the face of the public opinion. If we think about Spain, a point that I couldn't talk about in the previous time is the issues related to the decentralized structure, because it wasn't helping in the pandemic, and for the post-pandemic era and the usage of all these funds that we are talking about, the collaboration between the central government and the regional governments is crucial. So I think that there's so much to do on public opinion shaping when it comes to the conditionality or the logic of giving something in return, both in the national arena and also for the regional arena when it comes to Spain.
Yeah, thank you, Ilke. So I don't know if any of you speak now or shut up forever. If you want to intervene now, it's a time. If not, raise your. I give you 10 seconds if you want to intervene. Okay. So thank you very much, all of you, to be here with me this afternoon and with our lovely audience who came to listen to us. It was very nice to see you, and thank you also to TEPSA to host the event, and looking forward to see you in person and face to face when all this is over. Thank you very much, and good afternoon.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Hector.
Thank you very much.
Pleasure.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Have a nice afternoon.